Let us pray. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. O Lord, our shepherd, you provide all we need: green pasture, safe waters, protected paths. Even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we shall fear no evil, for you are with us. You protect and comfort us. Thank you for the shepherds among us, especially for healthcare workers whose care for others puts them at risk. Grant them wisdom, clarity, and rest. Heal us from our pride, which makes us claim immunity to a disease that knows no borders. When fear constricts our hearts and compassion dries up, renew us. When exhaustion and scarcity cloud our judgment, lead us. Encourage us to protect those most vulnerable as we love you with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, especially the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions. Bless the members of this chamber and all those who assist their work as they respond to the growing impact of the coronavirus. Shepherd and guide the members along right pathways. Always alert us to the reality of threats facing us, and give all our leaders calm assurance and abiding trust in you. Let's pray for our Prime Minister. Strengthen your servant Mia Amor, O God, to do what she has to do and bear what she has to bear. Accepting your healing gifts to the skill of surgeons and nurses, she may be restored with a thankful heart through Jesus Christ our Lord. Let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This house is in session.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay. You want me to do these ones? Commanded to lay the Director's Report and audited financial statements of the Barbados Conference Services Limited for the financial year ended March 31st, 2018, as well as the loan contract number 4987/0OC-BA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank Sustainable Development Policy Program.
Minutes of the meeting held on Monday, February 24th, 2020, and Friday, 20th of March, 2020, to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are deferred. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 11th of February, 2020, and Tuesday, 18th of February, 2020, to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be affirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Government notices, private members notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the first reading of the emergency. Sorry, I beg to move that the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2020 be read a first time.
Second, please.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Amendment Bill 2020.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or victory speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Babe, second that, sir.
Question is that the aforementioned standing order be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 15. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the second reading of the Emergency Management Amendment Bill 2003.
Honorable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, when we were last in this chamber a week ago, considerable amount of the chamber's time was spent in discussing the impact of COVID-19 on Barbados. We also looked at the impact of COVID-19 across the globe. And at that time, sir, we were focusing on what the government would do in the event that we had, in the event that we found ourselves suffering the worst of this disease. Sir, it would be difficult to describe to this chamber the amount of time, sheer man hours, that has been spent in the planning for and management of our response to COVID-19 since it became obvious that it was headed our way. We've had lots of sleepless nights, much of it because of the fact that a lot is not known about the disease, and almost daily the parameters are changing. But we recognize, sir, that notwithstanding any uncertainty, the one thing that we could control is how we prepare our government, how we prepare our country, and how we prepare our citizens. the overriding consideration at all times has been keeping the citizens of Barbados safe. And while it may appear to some that we've been focusing on economic issues, while it might appear to some that we've been putting a lot of emphasis on business continuity and the economy and replacing tourism and so on, replacing the revenue from tourism, all of which are important things, sir. The overriding obligation of this government has always been to keep Barbadians safe. Mr. Speaker, every year at hurricane season, we prepare. We've prepared in years when hurricanes came, and we prepared in years when hurricanes didn't come. Certainly since this administration came to power, we've spent a lot of time trying to put things in place in case a hurricane came. And every year at the start of the hurricane season, a huge envelope of emergency orders are presented to me as Attorney General for me to certify, just in case we needed them. As we prepared for hurricanes, Mr. Speaker, we had to ask ourselves, will we have a guaranteed water supply? Will we have a guaranteed supply of electricity? What are we going to do about food? What are we going to do about health care? And ironically, sir, every single one of those issues that we raised and answered and planned for associated with the fallout of a hurricane, we now find ourselves employing them not for a physical hurricane, but a hurricane now called COVID-19. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying to this chamber that under the Constitution of Barbados, the Governor General can declare a state of emergency and trigger powers under the Emergency Powers Act. That is always available to us. But historically, and when I say historically, I have to reflect on other places because in living memory, I don't know that we would have had a state of emergency post-World War II. And when I say in living memory, I reflected last week that the average age of this chamber is probably around, well, last week it was 30, but in the last 7 days, some of us have aged an awful lot. So I'll give it 45 today. But none of us, sir, can reflect on a time when we have ever actually had to trigger those emergency powers. As we have prepared for this COVID-19, we had to begin by determining what our philosophical stance was going to be. How are we approaching COVID-19? And it became evident very early that because we started early, we had an opportunity to project. And we had an opportunity to plan and say, if this happens, then that's what we will do. If that happens, then we will change. And so it became an exercise in managing our response. And while for some it may just be mere sophistry, a play on words, just nothing of substance, as an administration we felt that we needed to look at this emergency in the context of a public health emergency and trigger our responses in accordance with that which we have put in statute and that which we have planned for so long. And that's why we're here today, sir. We are here today to amend the Emergency Management Act to make provision for that act to be extended to public health emergencies. And during the course of this short presentation, I will mention a few other things. Everybody's waiting to hear what this curfew is all about, and I hope to be able to clarify any doubt in people's minds. But I would want to begin by pointing out, sir, that in an event of a hurricane, it is the Director of Emergency Management who's in charge. In the event of a flood, a storm, or earthquake, any of those physical natural disasters, the Director of Emergency Management is in charge. But this amendment, even though we are going to be working on the COVID issues within the context of the Emergency Management Act, we have been careful to make it clear that in the context of a public health emergency, the person who is in charge is the Chief Medical Officer. Now that's important, so I believe that it may not be well known, but the old politicians used to say that the Chief Medical Officer is the most powerful person in Barbados, more powerful than any Prime Minister, any Attorney General, any member of Cabinet. Because the Chief Medical Officer literally has the power to shut down any institution in this country on the basis of health concerns. So that's the first point that I wish to make, that even though we are locating our management of this situation in the context of the disaster type, the Emergency Management Act, which is directed towards physical and natural disasters, we are making sure that in this context, as long as it's a public health emergency, the powers of the Chief Medical Officer remain supreme. I don't think, sir, that this chamber needs to hear an exposition on COVID. You've certainly had the benefit of one all for much of last week. And if you needed more, you only have to turn on any of the international news channels in the morning, and you will have a constant diet of COVID-related news. What we can say, sir, is that we believe the time has come for Barbados to trigger certain measures, and I will give more details on those as we go ahead. I would like, though, before I get into those things, to laud the efforts of this government at managing this issue in a collaborative way. And I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for so graciously agreeing that we could do this legislation in all of its stages, both in the lower house and in the other place. Well, we have the power of numbers, sir. We begin by recognizing that there is one Barbados and that COVID does not recognize political party or party colors. A person who wears red will get it as easily as a person who wears blue, or as easily as a person who wears green, I think is green? Green. Gray. Green. Will get it as easily as a person who wears green, gray, green. And so, sir, COVID sees no political or geographical barriers. COVID recognizes no change in status from poor to rich or rich to poor. And from what we are hearing these days, so many young people are catching it that we are beginning to think it doesn't even recognize the hitherto much touted 70-year age limit, because the reports are that people of all ages are not only contracting it, but are absolutely dying from it. And every step of the way in this process, sir, the government of Barbados has collaborated with all sides politically, and we've collaborated with all interested parties. We've collaborated with the private sector, with the workers' unions, with the trade groupings, the church. Everybody has had an opportunity to weigh in on the many issues, and as they have weighed in, sir, as a government, we've tried to balance all of the competing interests, but the overriding thing at all times has been keeping Barbadians safe. Sir, the Prime Minister has ably led this exercise. For personal reasons, she has indicated to the country that she will be scarce for a day or two. And in that regard, I wish to thank the chaplain for offering that very kind prayer on behalf of our political leader. And she knows that she is certainly in our prayers and certainly in the prayers of Bishop Joe, all of us praying for an uneventful medical treatment and a quick and full recovery. So the PM is not physically here, but we expect to have her back with us within a very short order. However, the fact that the PM is not here does not at all mean that this exercise is bereft of leadership. And I believe that the efforts that we've put into managing this whole thing over the last few weeks demonstrates clearly that we have a solid vision for how we should deal with it. But sir, let us come to today. Last night, the Prime Minister announced that with 24 COVID cases as at that time, there was really little point waiting for the artificial mathematical exercise of the 25th. We could have, but there would have been little point. On Sunday, and the tests are done the afternoon, I think, of the day, and then reported the following morning. They become available the following morning. So on Monday morning, we knew that from all the tests we had done on the Sunday gone, we had 0 new cases. On the Tuesday, we knew that we had recorded a mere 1 case for the Monday. On the Wednesday, we knew that we had recorded 3 cases for the day before. And yesterday, we knew we recorded a further 3 cases for the day before. So there is a march that COVID-19 is making, sir, into the population of Barbados that is undeniable. And at this point, we have no mechanism to halt it. So there was no point waiting until we hit the magic number and say, well, let's wait until tomorrow. And when we get 25, we will then trigger. That would have been farcical and foolish. So having consulted with the Chief Medical Officer, all of the officers of the Ministry of Health, just about everybody under the sun, and having got the approval of Cabinet, the Prime Minister last night announced that Barbados will be under curfew. Now, sir, we understand that there is some confusion. I think that confusion arises only because in the short time that the Prime Minister spoke to the country, it was evident that she did not intend to make clear all of the dynamics of the situation. And in fact, she made it quite clear that others will speak about that. But people seem to have fastened on to what the Prime Minister said to me, which was quite clear, and determined that it absolutely meant this and it absolutely meant that. This is a challenging time for us, and it's not a time to be blaming anybody or any of those things. It is a time to make clear exactly what the curfew requirement is. But I remind you that the overriding objective is to keep Barbadians safe. Now, sir, it is not a difficult equation. It's not a difficult equation at all. What we do know is that in order to stem the spread of COVID-19, we have to limit human contact. If the cameras in this chamber panned across the chamber, it would look as though Parliament is scanty today. My mother would say a rat could run through it. But it isn't, sir, because our members are absent it is because we recognize that in order to stem the spread of COVID-19, even though we are doing our solemn and sworn duty as parliamentarians, we are under a duty to accept the rigors of physical distancing. So we have determined we have to be here. We can't do Parliament by video link. So we have to be here. But, sir, we are sitting in every other chair. Yesterday we had cabinet by Zoom. So all of us stayed in our respective homes and offices, but participated effectively in a full cabinet meeting and made important decisions to run this country in exactly the same way as if we had sat in the cabinet room in Bay Street. So the point is, sir, in everything we do, we have to recognize what our objective is: limiting human contact. We can stem the spread of COVID by limiting human contact. What that meant for us, sir, was that we had to make some decisions about how Barbados would operate. So, how do we limit human contact, sir? Well, the schools are closed, so that means that the students are not in schools and the teachers are not in schools. This decision, and I think we have to make this clear, this decision means that with the exceptions of a few instances, all businesses are closed in Barbados from Saturday, 8 o'clock, Saturday 28th, until April 14th. Well, that'll be April 14th, 8 o'clock as well. Okay? So the first day that Barbados will reopen fully then will be the 15th. All businesses, sir. I could probably repeat that another 10 times just for emphasis. The reason we are saying all businesses are closed is because we need Barbadians to stay away from each other. If we ask Barbadians to stay at home, then there are consequences. So businesses of necessity have to be closed during this period. Now, sir, I have got probably about 400 WhatsApp messages and as many calls, and everybody in here has got, I'm sure, many of the same or more. But let's look at the logic of it. What would be the point, sir, of keeping businesses open so their employees come to work and their customers come and go, and those customers may or may not catch a bus to come and go, and then have a requirement which would say that grocery stores are open and so on and so on and so on? We will in effect not be achieving anything, sir. This is not a curfew to maintain law and order. If you have a curfew to maintain law and order, place shuts down at night and you go about your business during the day. This is a period during which we are going to severely and in a compulsory way restrict human activity. Plain and simple. With the exceptions of a few businesses, and I'll tell you what those are, all businesses are closed. So the hairdresser, sir, is closed. The nail salon, the computer store, the place that rents tables and chairs, the construction companies, the manufacturers of paints and plastics and all those things, sir, are all closed. The reason is because we want to limit human contact of your employees and your consumers. Now, there are two riders to that. Essential services remain open. I think that's logical. Now, sir, essential services are defined for this purpose as being, and I'll give you the exact definition. I think people know what we mean by essential services, but for clarity, let me say, under this legislation, it will mean the medical profession, the paramedical profession, staff of pharmaceutical agencies, staff of hospitals, clinics and pharmacies, persons employed or engaged as caregivers. So let me make this clear. Your household help, if you have a maid or some other kind of domestic worker, that doesn't apply. That's not an essential service. But if you are a caregiver, so a person who is a night nurse for an elderly person who may have Alzheimer's, or somebody who comes in during the day to provide home help and so on, sir, not your maid, but somebody who is a caregiver, we have decided to treat those as an essential service. Now, sir, let me say, the one thing about a government is that they must govern, they must make decisions. And we can't be bound by other people's strictures. We recognize that in Barbados, we have a large number of elderly people who rely on somebody to come in and take care of them. It's often a family member. Often it's a family member. Often, sir, it is not even a business, because it's businesses that we're closing. And if it's not a business, then the lawyers would say, well, that's not covered. That's not prohibited. But the point is, we want to make it clear that caregivers are going to be entitled to move around at night or day. Law enforcement officers, obvious. Defense force officers, obvious. But we're also including customs officers, sir. Prison officers. Security services, sir. Now let me offer an explanation. During the curfew period, you're not allowed to be on the road. Businesses will be closed. It is important, and we've made it quite clear, that businesses have to be responsible for their own security. At this time, sir, we cannot deploy members of the BDF or the police to be guarding people's warehouses and office buildings. That's not what we're about. So they still have to take care and pay due regard to their own circumstances. There are a number of security companies that monitor. They monitor the alarm systems. They have response teams, companies that provide security guards, sir. All of those are considered essential services and will be allowed to move about and do their business night or day. Disaster management services, again, that's essential. Firefighting services, also essential. The provision of electricity, telecommunications, media, and broadcasting services, sir. We consider that to be an essential service. We can't afford for electricity to be down, no matter what. We can't afford for our telecommunications systems to be affected, no matter what. But equally, sir, at this point in time, the role of the media and the broadcasting companies is more critical than ever, because where there's a vacuum on information, then fake news and rumor will spread. So it's important to us that media and broadcasting remain available to work night and day so that news, whether it is good or bad, will reach the Barbadian public and the international community. Also, as an essential service is the provision of transport services, whether by aircraft, ship, motor vehicle, or public service vehicle. So we think that's fairly self-evident. It is still important for transport services to be available. The operation of the airport and seaport, you know, there are a number of people who've been saying for the longest time, we need to close this, we need to close that. It is so short-sighted, sir. We're trying to ensure that we have at least 6 months supply of medication for Barbados. Any kind of medication. Okay? We've instructed the drug service to stockpile medication because we don't know where this is going. I understand that there are 134 medications that are short in the United States. We want to make sure that Barbadians are not in a position where they have to suffer because these things are not available. No, sir, if we don't make them here, and we don't, we have to bring them in. Plain and simple. There are things that we need that will have to come in by ship. There are things that we need that will have to come in by plane. So the airport and the seaport are essential services. And when we talk about the services, obviously we mean the people too who are employed in those services. The collection, storage, purification, or distribution of water for use by the public or any section of the public. So, Barbadians, you know, we saying, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, but there has to be water. And that's a special plea for St. Joseph, if you don't mind, sir. And St. Thomas, let's get some water. The collection, storage, treatment, and disposal of sewage, garbage, or refuse, also an essential service, so they are going to be allowed to work night or day. And finally, sir, the removal, handling, or burial of deceased persons or disposal of dead animals. That's self-explanatory. So all of those businesses, all of those enterprises, all of that activity that I've just mentioned are unaffected by this curfew order. Those entities, whatever you want to call them, will continue to function as per usual. Now, what do I mean by as per usual, though? As far as time is concerned. But we still expect that wherever possible, those entities will try to scale back the number of people that are engaged. Because at all times we want to stem the spread of this disease. So, we start out with all businesses are closed, but essential services are able to move around. But of course, sir, we recognize that there are still some necessaries that Barbadians will be entitled to access. And I'll go through the list with you, but the principle is that during daylight hours, Barbadians still need to be able to go to the supermarket and get groceries. They still need to be able to go to the pharmacist and get their medication. And when once you get to that point, then you recognize that there are some entities in Barbados that are actually producing food for our consumption. So during this 2-week period, the following enterprises are going to be allowed to operate. And JS is going to publish this list, but I'm going to go through it fairly carefully now. Abattoirs, butcher shops, and fish markets are going to be allowed to operate between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Now, let me make it clear. The government of Barbados is not telling a company when it should open or when it should close. We want you to use your good sense. We want you to employ skeleton staff. But what we are saying is that we're setting the beginning limit and the closing limit. So an enterprise that is allowed to function may say, having regard to the demand out there, having regard to all these issues, we see that we could open at 8, but frankly, we're going to open at 10. And we see that we can close at 5, but we believe it is better to close at 2. So this is not a case at all where we're saying that you have to open at X time or Y time. We're saying that between 8 and 5, abattoirs can function. They open whenever they want. They have social distancing, physical distancing, but that is the That's the window within which they can operate. Now, the reason for this window should be obvious. The curfew ends at 6, and people need to be able to get from their homes into the workplace. The workplace needs to be able to function as an abattoir, for an example. But the important thing is that we ensure that there's a supply of food for Barbadians and that Barbadians can access those supplies. Bakeries, sir, will be allowed to open between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Farms will be allowed to open between 5 a.m. and 6 p.m. Pharmaceutical manufacturers, manufacturers of juices, soft drinks, and dairy products, food processors, and food distributors will be allowed to open between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions, excluding insurance companies, will be allowed to open between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So we're not saying that a bank has to open at 9 and close at 5. They can open at 10 and close at 2. That's up to them. But we are setting the limits between which you can operate, do business, and interface with the public. Cleaning services will be able to operate between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Restaurants, sir, will be able to operate between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m., but only for the purposes of drive-through or takeaway. So let's have any confusion. Any restaurant, whether you're a fast food restaurant or a fine dining restaurant or a cook shop, whatever you are, you operate between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m., but you are not to allow dining on the premises. You can do drive-through, so McDonald's or Burger King drive-through, Chefette drive-through, KFC drive-through. You can go in, purchase, and take away, but you're not allowed to consume, to dine on the premises, and your times of operation are severely limited, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Naturally, sir, we need to have fuel to power our vehicles, fuel to run the turbines, to run our generators. So fuel manufacturers, fuel storage facilities, and fuel distributors will be allowed to operate between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. Gas stations will be allowed to operate between 7 a.m. and I think that was 5 p.m., but 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Now, sir, delivery services have become very popular, especially now that people are physically distancing, and companies are now making quite a bit of money delivering food, delivering groceries, and so on. So delivery services relating to the delivery of food, groceries, and pharmaceuticals will be able to operate between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. We've had questions about hotels, sir. Hotels and villas are going to be allowed to operate for the entire 24-hour period. That's clear. Hotels and villas will operate for the entire 24-hour period. However, gaming rooms, spas, gyms, discos, restaurants, other than for takeaway service and room service, golf courses, lawn tennis, squash courts, all of those ancillary services are to be closed. There's no point having a hotel open, trying to ensure physical distancing, but they can all sit down and have nice dinners or nice lunches and nice breakfasts and go and play squash and all those things, sir. They're to be allowed, they're allowed to be open, but all of those recreational activities that are allied and on the premises are to be closed. Now, there's logic about that you can't avoid. if you close a hairdressing salon on High Street, there's no reason why you should allow the hairdressing salon that is in the lobby of a hotel to operate. Plain and simple, okay? So hotels are allowed to accept guests, but all of those ancillary recreational services are excluded. We have Portville Sugar Factory, sir, that runs 3 shifts. Portville Sugar Factory will be excluded from the curfew. Private veterinary services, as needed, will be allowed. Obviously, animals in distress, things of that sort, people have to be able to have their animals tended to. So, sir, in the private sector, all businesses are to be closed except for those that I have just mentioned. So, no point in calling, no point in reaching out to your MP, no point calling a congressman. You are closed. Now, the statute does give the opportunity, sir, for exemptions to be made other than these. Now, let's make it clear. None of us have a claim to be all-knowing and all-seeing. And we recognize that when we state a list like this, there's always the possibility of something else that feeds into the process. There's always that possibility, sir. So, we have to make provision for exemptions. And we already have an exemption in relation to construction. Construction is closed. If you are building a step, a guard wall, a house, a factory, work ceases during that period. I hope I'm making myself clear, sir. I hope I'm making myself clear. However, the government is under an imperative to get Harrison's Point open to receive COVID victims within the next week or two. So I've already indicated to the Minister of Health that those construction companies that are working at Harrison's Point to get the naval base ready, they will be given an exemption. That is a matter of national interest. Now, of course, to work in St. Lucie. So if John Brown Construction Company is given an exemption to work in St. Lucie, that does not extend to him finishing the house in Durance that he started week before. That site at Durance, or wherever it is closed. However, he can work at Harrison's Point. Construction requires supplies. Hardware stores are closed, all of them. However, for the limited purpose of supplying goods to the Harrison's Point operation, they will be allowed to open. Okay? I hope that's clear. Let me put it another way. The hardware store in Lower Estate or up Christchurch will be closed. However, if for Harrison's Point a particular item or series of items are required that they produce, we will allow the exemption to extend to that. But it's not to come and open the store. It is to go to your warehouse, select the goods, and get them delivered up to Harrison's Point. Anything beyond that is a breach of the order and will attract the severest of penalties. Now, I think that if we view it in the context of saying that in order to prevent the spread of the disease from one person to another, what we're doing and why we're doing it will become absolutely logical. There's the possibility that we may not have contemplated everything, but in exceptional circumstances, we're going to grant exemptions. Okay? Now, the matter of the public service. It is important for the country to continue to operate with some level of normalcy, and that requires the government to be able to function. But every single ministry has been mandated to come up with a plan which would see skeleton staff operating from the ministerial office. So, during this period, for example, Mr. Speaker, we can expect that the courts will be closed unless you have a matter before the duty judge, or unless any judge wants to conduct a hearing or part of a hearing by Zoom, and I encourage that. So the courts will be open to some extent, but it is obvious that we can't have the courts functioning as a total enterprise. Now, the Solicitor General's Chambers has about 18 lawyers, but we don't anticipate that during that period there'd be any reason for them to come to court, because the courts are closed with that limitation, with that proviso that I've just mentioned. So every ministry, including my own, has been asked to come up with a plan to make sure that ministries, selected ministries, are staffed by a skeleton number of individuals, with the other officers being allowed to work from home. Now, working from home, sir, is something that has been touted by many over the last few years. We've been talking about flexi time and working from home and working using computers and so on. And I have to say that I hope that at the end of this COVID epidemic, that we will actually have found ways to change the way in which we do things. But the point is, government departments are going to be open, but not fully staffed. Open, but not fully staffed. And even then, sir, not all government departments will be up and running. So let me go through the list for you. The following government ministries, departments, and statutory corporations shall open between the hours of 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. The Office of the Attorney General, the Registrar of the Supreme Court, and the Department of Public Prosecutions, the National Assistance Board, the Child Care Board, any of the government's laboratories, the National Disabilities Unit, the National Insurance Department, the Treasury, the Central Bank, the Post Office, Civil Aviation Department, Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of the Public Service, the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, the Ministry of Information, Broadcasting and Public Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Commerce Department in the Ministry of Commerce, Barbados Tourism Management, Inc., Central Purchasing, Barbados Meteorological Services, the Barbados Statistical Department, the Barbados Revenue Authority, the Barbados Licensing Authority, the Urban Development Commission, the Rural Development Commission, the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation, and the Barbados Agricultural Management Company. Also, the Ministry of Agriculture's Plant Quarantine and Veterinary Services. So we've tried to identify, Mr. Speaker, those key government departments that even in a shutdown, there would likely be a requirement for them to work. So Central Purchasing still has to make sure that commodities reach wherever they need to reach. Central Purchasing, I think, I'm sure, is the agency that will supply goods and obtain services to many of the government departments. The Commerce Department in the Ministry of Commerce, we are concerned about the possibility of price gouging, so the Commerce Department needs to function. But at this point in time, sir, except there's something exceptional happening, the other departments, really, we don't see them needing to work. So these government departments are considered to be critical and will work from 9 until 2. But even as they work, they will be expected to operate with skeleton staff. The Ministry of the Public Service is currently engaged in finalizing a work-from-home program, so that the fact that you are not required to come to work does not mean that you don't work. So there are individuals who, because of the work they do, would be encouraged to work from home. I would not expect, sir, that a filing clerk would be told work from home to do what? That would be illogical. But on the other hand, an economist who is doing a research paper or who is trying to finalize certain figures may be able to do some of that from home. I'm not here trying to say who should or should not. That is a matter for each ministry and each department to resolve. But the firm expectation is that ministries will be staffed by skeleton numbers, while the other individuals would work from home, sir. So I believe that the Clerk of Parliament will stay home, and the deputy clerks, because Parliament is not seen, unless we have to come back within that period, as being one of these government departments that have to function. But we may have to come back, so don't get too comfortable. Obviously, things like meteorological services, that's a daily requirement, so we can't function without that. So I think that if you look through it, I mean, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, every single day the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is at the forefront of helping us to deal with this COVID issue, because much of what we need is not available here and can only be obtained with the intervention and the assistance of foreign governments. It has been disclosed that we have requested the government of Cuba for assistance with sending nurses. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to constantly be dealing with that process. As we deal with diplomatic issues across the world, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to be on point. On the other hand, though, the foreign trade component is not seen as being a part that needs to be at the ministry every day. So they may well be asked by the ministry to work from home. So I hope that clarifies what our expectation is in terms of the private sector and the public sector. But of course, sir, I remind you that we've never gone this way before. We have no experience with curfews, happily. And I hope that in the next 150 years, we don't have to have any experience with one either. But as we've worked through this, we recognize that there are a number of other things that we need to make clear. Again, the overriding objective is to compel physical distancing and to reduce human interaction. So, it is important for me to make it clear that under this particular directive, except for the conduct of funeral services and weddings, all churches and places of religious worship, including mosques and synagogues, shall be closed. I'm going to repeat that. Except for the conduct of funeral services and weddings, all churches and places of religious worship, including mosques and synagogues, shall be closed. Now, we've determined, sir, that even though we're going to permit weddings, we've provided that a wedding, at any wedding, the numbers have to be severely limited. So you're limited to the bride, the bridegroom, the official witnesses, and the marriage officer. We're going to allow you to get married. Marriage is an important institution. If you have to get married, you should get married. But the numbers are severely limited to the bride, the bridegroom, the official witnesses, and the marriage officer. Courts are closed, so you can't get divorced. In relation to funerals, Mr. Speaker, in relation to funerals, funerals will be limited to no more than 10 mourners, 1 officiant, and the funeral director and the necessary staff. So let me repeat that. No funerals are limited to no more than 10 mourners, 1 officiant, the funeral director, and necessary staff. Now again, sir, and you know, there's a funeral in my constituency. I want to be there, and I know that the person was well loved, and it would be a big, big funeral. But we're enforcing the requirement for eliminating these kinds of gatherings. So in the interest of not spreading COVID, we're saying no more than 10 mourners, the officiant, funeral director, and the necessary staff. Now, sir, there's always somebody who trying to get away, sir. I understand that somebody had a party planned, and when they realized they couldn't have it, they decided to keep a bus crawl. Now, that kind of stuff, sir, is completely irresponsible. It is repugnant to common sense and endangers every single person in this country. So let us make it clear, sir. No person shall host or attend a private party, a recreational or competitive sporting event. I've already talked about weddings, a banquet, a ball or reception, any social event, a meeting of a fraternal society, private or social club, or civic association or organization. Now, sir, I don't know how else we can put it. The Prime Minister said it most eloquently last night when she said, "Stay home." We have to eliminate the spread of COVID, and it is not worth it for you to go out and have a little fete and a little frolic and so on, and then either contract the COVID yourself and spread it to your aunt and your uncle and your sister and your brother and your children for 2 or 3 hours of social interaction. There are also a number of other restrictions, sir. No person shall visit any place of quarantine or an isolation station. No person shall visit a prison or a government industrial school. So, visits to the prison or to the government industrial schools are terminated during this period. Private businesses can operate from home, sir. We're closing down all businesses, but that does not mean that if you can conduct your enterprise from home, or if your employees, all 50 of them or however many it is, can work from home, let them do so. We're not trying to eliminate commercial activity or beneficial activity. If you can do it from home, fine. But you're not going to be allowed to go to your office to do it. No more than one person at any time shall visit a patient in a hospital, nursing home, senior citizens home, maternity home, and facilities for the treatment of persons with addiction or dependency on drugs or substances. And we've repeated it just to be sure. Subject to the provisions of this directive, every person shall remain in the confines of his home and his curtilage. If a person contravenes this directive without reasonable explanation, he is guilty of an offense and liable on conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 1 year or both. Now, sir, we are going to ask JS to publish this particular list. There are all kinds of lists that have floated out there on social media. Let me make it clear, because I think I've been passed a little note. Insurance companies are closed. Insurance companies are closed. I'm sure you can see a meme any day now with the Attorney General's face announcing closed. But this is a very serious issue, sir. It's a very serious issue, and we have to take it seriously. Now, it's for a 2-week period. There's the possibility of the time being extended, but we will deal with that when we get there. At this point in time, we know that we've determined that this is the period of time we're going to restrict the movement of Barbadians. We hope that our efforts will, as they say, flatten the curve. At this point in time, I have to pay special tribute to the people who are involved in the public health sector. I don't think we understand what it involves of them. When an individual is found to have contracted COVID, every single person with whom that person came into contact has to be tracked and traced and screened. Now, sir, a person who lands at the airport comes across first a greeter, then an immigration officer, a red cap, customs, maybe a taxi man outside, and on and on and on and on. And if they're going Oistins a Friday night, that's many more people. But the public health nurses have to trace every single person with whom you came into contact. Now, sir, the Minister of Health told me that his people were overwhelmed